Well, hello. I don't have any joiners this morning on today's Zoom session for 250 real ear measures. However, what we can and will cover this morning and next week is the stuff contained in Unit 3, fitting methods. Now, I know you've had fitting methods in HIS 150, a prior course. But do you know what I want to really stress is that the development of real ear and fitting methods are very, very much intertwined. Each of them affected the development of the other. In fact, in the new edition of my book, I wrote about old fitting methods in Chapter 4, real ear in Chapter 5, and new fitting methods of today in Chapter 6. I deliberately stuck the chapter on real ear in the middle like a sandwich because they're so intertwined and connected. And that's why I think it bears some repeating, but also some fleshing out. Hopefully there will be some things that you didn't really think about before mentioned in this morning's Zoom session. So what the hey? Why don't I kind of begin here? Fitting methods. Why do we have so many different fitting methods in the first place? Hope everybody's printed up there or can follow along with one's trusty-dusty little sheet. Notes from Unit 3, along with the PowerPoint from Unit 3. And why do we have so darn many of these things in the first place? Here, I'll give you something better to look at than my ugly mug. So why don't we just go over here, share screen. And yeah, I know this is the opening screen for good old Zoom sessions here, but we'll check out this PowerPoint. And we'll just take a peek at this guy right here. Fitting the eye versus fitting the ear. Why do we have so darn many fitting methods in the first ding-dong place? Does optometry have this? When you're getting your glasses and they're testing your vision, they're putting something in front of your eye going, ka-chung, how does that look? Oh, kind of blurry. Ka-chung, how does that look? Oh, it's getting better. Ka-chung, how does that look? Oh, yeah, it looks really good. Ka-chung, how does that look? Oh, it's getting blurry again. Okay, back to the previous one. Ka-chung, yep, that's good. Healed. Okay, next eye. All right. Glasses, eyes, and vision loss. Let's look at that for a second. Because when we know who we're not, we have a better idea of who we are. And we are not optometry. Optometry is fitting conductive vision loss. Conductive vision loss. Look at this picture here closely. Here's an eyeball on the left. Notice that the light isn't being focused properly upon the intact retina. It's kind of ending here. It should get to here. If the light gets to here, then you've got good vision. But if it's not getting right to that retina, you've got blurred vision. So what is the retina? The retina is, in quotes, the hair cells of the eye. In quotes, the retina is the cochlea of the eye. It changes light into electricity. Just like hair cells in the cochlea change sound into electricity. And electricity for both senses is what the brain understands. And that's why I put a not equal sign right there, because they are so radically different. With the ear, there's no problem with sound getting through the middle ear. I mean, middle ear pathology accounts for like 5% of all hearing loss. 95% of hearing loss is due to damage in the cochlea. And right what it says on the bottom here, hair cells of the cochlea are, in quotes, the retina of the ear. So sensory neural loss, if we went back to the eyeball, is kind of like me going upon your retinas, scratching them, and saying, okay, now go ahead and fit your glasses. Even though the light is going to be sent properly to the retina with the glasses, still the retina itself has damage. And that's the difference between vision loss and hearing loss, sensory neural hearing loss. And that is what the public doesn't get. And that is why we need to be ambassadors of our field. We are the curators, the custodians of the knowledge of the ear. And it's our job to impart or teach the public about the ear because they don't get it. They haven't got the foggiest notion, and they're quite bothered that their hearing aids cost more than their glasses, and yet they don't work as well as their glasses. That's the rub of our field. When you're going into optometry shops or when people are getting glasses, they're not sitting there getting counseled on the use of their glasses and having to learn realistic expectations and the limitations of their glasses. Optometrists don't take counseling courses like we do because there's a different kind of damage to the end organ. Theirs is a conductive vision loss. Ours is not. Only 5% of hearing loss is conductive. Conductive loss has everything going for it. Medicine can fix it, and if medicine doesn't choose to fix it, hearing aids are fantastic because their speech discrimination is 100%. All they need is power, wonder-working power. Just get that darn sound through the pathology of the middle ear, and once you do, the cochlea is blessedly intact. So they love their hearing aids. Hearing aids for them are sort of like an elevator. The box is sitting here and it just goes up. Their thresholds are increased, and so are their UCLs increased. Their floor is increased and the ceiling is increased. Everything went up. So conductive hearing loss is like a plug in your ear. And if that's the scene, well, then a fitting method is a fitting method is a fitting method. You would have the fitting method, singular, just like optometry does. They don't have fitting methods, plural. It's either correct or it's incorrect. It's either focused properly on the retina or it's not focused properly on the retina. Not ours. Hearing loss is damage to the cochlea itself. And that's what gives rise to different philosophies, different viewpoints. Now, DSL, half gain rule, pogo, burger, Libby, all these different fitting methods that we have. We have a plurality of fitting methods with an S behind it because of the nature of the damage to the end organ called the ear. That's why it's very different. We're in a totally different kettle of fish. So let's look at our notes here. I'm sharing screen here. Let's take a peek. Fitting methods. Why do we have so darn many of them in the first place? The retina of the ear itself is damaged. Most hearing loss is sensory neural. If most optometry clients had retinal damage, optometry and audiology would be more similar. Most vision loss is conductive. The eyeball is simply too short or too long. That's why with hearing aids, now to our field, there's two main goals in fitting. One is providing the proper amount of gain or output. But the second goal is you've got to increase the signal to noise ratio, the intensity of speech compared to the intensity of noise. How do you help the person with sensory neural loss separate speech from background noise? Because background noise is the biggest culprit, the biggest complaint of hearing aid users. Background noise, background noise, background noise. And we might think to ourselves, my gosh, they complain a lot. I mean, heck, if I've got normal hearing, background noise is a pain in the arse for me too. You go in a noisy restaurant and you've got to raise your voice. It's harder to hear. Why are they complaining so much, those who wear hearing aids? Because the retina, in quotes, of the ear itself is damaged. And when you've got damaged hair cells, you cannot separate frequencies that are close together. You may recall from anatomy class, your frequency resolution is compromised. And when your frequency resolution is compromised due to damaged hair cells, you have a difficulty separating 1000 hertz from 1001 hertz from 1002 hertz. You can't separate them. That's why they have trouble separating speech from background noise. They need a bigger difference between frequencies to tell that there's a difference. And that's why hearing aids use directional microphones and digital noise reduction to attack that second endeavor of hearing aids, increasing the signal to noise ratio. The signal being speech, the noise being noise. And even if you can increase that signal to noise ratio by only a few decibels, let's say the background noise is 70, if you can make the speech 75, the guy with hearing loss is going to love you. Okay? Now we stop for a second. Fitting methods do not address this second endeavor. Fitting methods do not, repeat, not address the signal to noise ratio issue. Fitting methods only address the first issue, providing the proper amount of gain and output. Okay, not the separation of speech from noise. That's got to be done in a different with different toolbox. Anyway, just as long as what we're doing is just making the ground flat here, okay? Fitting methods also address only gain and output. Specifically, we attempt to watch the maximum power output of the hearing aid so it doesn't exceed the listener's uncomfortable loudness level. Give enough gain for the listeners to comfortably hear conversational speech. And thirdly, to provide the right shape of frequency response. A guy's got sloping high frequency loss, you want a rising frequency response from your hearing aid. Duh. Okay, let's go to the next point here. Mirror the audiogram with full-on gain. Sorry, bud, can't do it. Let's look at this. Go to the next slide. Oh, this is just hearing aids do not grow new hair cells. A hearing aid is not like a new ear. Perfect hearing looks like this, while impaired hearing looks like that. That's the damaged retina we talked about. Okay, whoops. Now, so taking a look at this scene here. Mirror the audiogram with full gain. Well, let's look at this more closely. Take a peek at this. Here's a hearing loss dropping down. Okay, for 0 dB sounds, you'd have to add about 30 here for the guy to hear them here. And for 0 dB sounds, you'd have to add about 70 for the guy to hear them here, right? But if your input wasn't 0 dBHL, what if your input was speech? What is the intensity of speech? Well, in dBHL, it's between 50 to 60. And in dBSPL, it's between 60 to 70. So either of those levels, if that's your input, I can't add 30 to that input and 70 to that input because I'm going to blast the guy to kingdom come. You see? Look at the right. This is what new real ear is doing today. We're taking the audiogram, ODDIOGRAM. We're taking that weird audiogram and we're flipping it right side up. And now you can see the hearing loss plotted up instead of down. Because now the hearing loss and hearing aids are speaking the same language. They're plotting the decibels up. God knows why we started plotting the decibels down on an audiogram. There's an interesting article by James Jerger on that, but I digress. That's another story. Look at the right side audiogram. You'll see the guy's hearing loss plotted up now. And if you look at, let's say, soft sounds like 5 decibels, look at the bottom dotted line. For the guy to hear all those 5 decibel inputs, we'd have to amplify them by the full degree of the hearing loss, wouldn't we? Okay? But the problem is with sensory neural loss, 95% of hearing loss, with sensory neural loss, the ceiling of loudness tolerance is around 100 to 110, sometimes even 90. So I can't, while I can amplify 5 decibel inputs, by the full degree of the guy's hearing loss. I can't amplify speech inputs by the full degree of the guy's hearing loss. I've got to back off, Jack. Know what I mean, Stan? So here's another way of looking at it. Loudness growth for normal hearing versus sensory neural loss. Here's decibels along the horizontal. Here's psychoacoustics along the vertical. To a normal hearing person, we're looking at the red line. 10 to 20 decibels is very soft. 50 to 60 is comfortable. 90 to 100 is too loud. With outer hair cell damage, which causes presbycusis, noise-induced hearing loss, whatever, with hair cell damage, now the floor is elevated. The ceiling isn't. So the guy can't hear down at 0 anymore. Now he can't hear until 50. So now 50 to 60 sounds very soft. We're looking at the light blue line. Whereas 90 to 100 still sounds too loud. And so hearing aids have to amplify the soft sounds by a lot and loud inputs by little or nothing at all. Now, we covered that in compression class 240, right? Hearing aids today all address compression, and all fitting methods today address compression, but they didn't used to. Here's another hearing loss going down, and this is showing equal loudness contours that we covered in psychoacoustics, Acoustics 110. The bottom blue line shows minimal audible pressure, the intensity level that all sounds under a headphone have to be for the guy to just barely hear them. And we're talking in dB SPL, the vertical axis SPL. All audiometers take this bottom line and they flatten it, and they call it 0 dB HL, right? All those differences across this bottom blue line are built into, calibrated into the audiometer. That's why you need them calibrated every year. Anyway, regardless, the guy with hearing loss, we're looking at the red lines. He's got a big dynamic range in the lows. You can hear lots, you can hear quite soft in the lows, and you can tolerate up to quite loud in the lows. But in the high frequencies, his floor is elevated. Okay, so his dynamic range is squished. All right, and hearing aid fitting methods all address this. It's the narrow dynamic range. Normal dynamic range seen on the left, soft, average, loud, dBHL, okay? Reduced dynamic range on the right. You see, this is a scene that vision loss does not present. If this was vision loss, the right hand red, blue, and yellow here would be just as long as the left hand red, blue, and yellow. It would just be shifted up higher, right? Just like the elevator I was talking about. The floor and the ceiling of the box would just go up. So hearing aids would just have to amplify more. The amplification would be simple, but it's not in our case, which, by the way, explains why hearing aids are so expensive. Tell your clients this. What kind of amplifier changes the amount by which it amplifies? So that soft sounds are automatically amplified by a lot, and loud sounds are automatically the hearing aid backs off. That takes quite the technology, okay? Anyway, here's another way. Let's look at reduced dynamic range, because this is the mother load behind fitting methods. This is where they all come from. The audiogram, normal. This guy's got a big dynamic range. His UCL's down around 100. His MCL's around 50 to 60. He's got a nice large dynamic range. Moderate hearing loss, and we'll call it sensory neural, not conductive, sensory neural. A narrow dynamic range. His UCL hasn't changed. His MCL is somewhere in between his thresholds and UCL. His dynamic range has shrunk. The decibel distance between the softest one can hear and the loudest one can tolerate, that decibel distance has shrunk. Linear hearing aids were the state of the art all the way until the early to mid 1990s. This is not long ago. Okay, this is barely more than 20 years ago. This is all hearing aids were linear. Sip of coffee there with a bit of whiskey added in our belly. Linear hearing aids. This is just one particular picture of a fictitious linear hearing aid. Input along the horizontal, output along the vertical. The linear gain is seen by the 45-degree angle yellow line, such that 0 in is 60 out, 20 in is 80 out. Oh, my numbers have slid a little bit here. You know what I mean, though. 40 in would be 100 out, 80 in would be, 120 out, and then the hearing aid stopped the output from getting any more. And it did this by clipping, literally clipping the peaks. Well, when linear hearing aids were out, remember what linear does? It amplifies all inputs by the same amount, okay? Linear hearing aids don't do this. They don't amplify soft sounds by a lot and loud sounds by little or nothing at all. They amplify whatever you set it to. They'll amplify a whisper by the same amount as they'll amplify average speech, by the same amount as they'd amplify loud sounds. Please don't think linear hearing aids means all frequencies are given the same gain. That's not true, okay? But all input levels are given the same gain. Always remember that. Don't confuse those two, but here you go. This is the anchor of fitting methods. Sensory neural with its reduced dynamic range plus linear hearing aids equals the half gain method. What the Sam Hill was that? Well, we recall from our 150 fitting methods class. Linear fitting methods were based on the half gain rule by Liebarger. Linear circuits were the state of the art. Same gain for all input levels. We have already said you can't mirror the audiogram with full-on linear gain because you're going to get too much outputs at high inputs. He found people preferred half gain. In other words, the gain that equaled half the degree of their hearing loss. He used trial and error. And the half gain rule is still the spinal cord behind all fitting methods today. This is the reality. Why? Because sensory neural hearing loss makes the floor elevated, but the ceiling hasn't changed. It's all about that reduced dynamic range. All, A-L-L, 100%. It's all about that. The funniest thing about our field is no method has been proven to be the best. I think that's hilarious. So there we sit. As a field, we know we have to provide gain, but how much gain? Well, there's all different philosophies, and they all hover around this half gain rule. They all kind of like bees, just kind of buzzing around it. They know where the honey is, and the honey is that half gain rule. Here's how people fit hearing aids in those days. I did too, okay? This was in the days just before real ear. They called it functional gain. They took a guy and they tested his hearing under headphones. They came up with the thresholds. You can see them here. Okay? Then they took off the headphones. They plugged an ear, because you never fit a guy with two ears. Ear, nose, and throat doctors hated that too. You're ripping them off. The people were called hearing aid dealers. Sounds like a drug dealer, okay? Selling hearing aids door to door just about. You fit monoraily if the guy was right-handed or left-handed. That's how people used to do it. No kidding. Anyway, you put the hearing aid in his ear. You'd plug his other ear. You'd put him in the sound field. He would sit a meter away from a speaker. So you had the headphones off now. Now he's facing a loudspeaker. That's about a yard away from his face. And you, the clinician, are now playing warble tones at 250. Then at 500. Then warble. How come? You get less reverberation that way instead of a pure tone. Okay. Who cares? And with the hearing aid turned to a comfortable volume for the guy, okay, to what he thought sounded good, you would test his thresholds again. So here's the O's are his unaided thresholds under headphones, and the A's are his aided thresholds in the sound field. And your endeavor, your whole goal was to make sure that the A's were about halfway above the thresholds. Because you knew that if you did that with soft sounds, you're testing, remember, you're testing thresholds. If you improved his hearing thresholds by about half the degree of his loss, you knew that if you did that, you had reached your half gain target. And that's the letter A's here. That's good. Did you get half gain? Yep. Okay. Why do you want half gain? Because I know then, if I'm delivering half gain with the hearing aid, I now know that aided speech is going to sit halfway, nicely in his dynamic range, between his floor, his thresholds, and his ceiling. See how the audiogram is so stupid? The floor is at the top and the ceiling's at the bottom. But nonetheless, I didn't make it up. But the whole purpose about aiding his thresholds by half the degree of his loss was that you knew that if you did that, aided speech input, 65 dB SPL or 50 to 60 dB HL, if those inputs plus the gain of half the degree of his loss equals an output that's handleable. Okay? That's around his MCL. And his MCL will be around here in the shaded green. Good. Like an old salmon, you can swim up the stream to die. You've done your job. You see what an indirect thing this is, though? They didn't have real ear. You couldn't see unaided speech, and you couldn't see aided speech like we can. So they couldn't counsel that way. They just didn't have. Liebarger, this is what he came up with. He'd have given his eye teeth to be able to see what we can see with real ear today. Nonetheless, see how the fitting methods and real ear are tied, inextricably tied together. Today we do real ear this way. We take the unaided ear canal resonance in yellow. We put a tiny probe tube in the guy's ear, and we measure his unaided ear canal resonance, which usually has a peak around 2,700 hertz. And then they would hold that tube carefully in place, and they put the hearing aid on top of that tube. Don't disturb it. And then they turn the hearing aid to a comfortable loudness level, and then you'd see what your real ear aided response was. Real ear unaided ear canal resonance, real ear aided response. And the difference between aided and unaided was your real ear insertion gain. And you'd want to know, is that close to the fitting method target? Now, read carefully. Insertion gain, real ear emerged in the late 1980s, not in the 80s, but in 1988, 89 is when it came out. Insertion gain, aided versus unaided dB SPL at the tympanic membrane. The fitting methods didn't change. The fitting methods didn't change. Note that the target values here, this red line, is identical to the target here. I didn't change the numbers of fig. Didn't touch them. Okay? So what changed was not the fitting methods, but what changed was the method in which you verified the fitting method. Okay? Here you've got a fitting method in place, and now you're tweaking the controls of the hearing aid, low frequency gain, high frequency gain, all that stuff, the maximum power output. You're tweaking all of that stuff on the hearing aid, okay, so that your goal is, am I going to increase the guy's hearing thresholds by half the degree of his loss? If I do, then I know that aided speech output will sit nicely in his dynamic range. Here's real ear. Same goal, same idea. It's just that instead of the guy raising his hand voluntarily, letting you know when he or she hears the tones, unaided versus hearing aid and ear aided. Okay, instead of doing that, you're just putting a probe in the tube, in the ear canal, going, brrr, the sweep tone just goes right across from 200 to 500, 5,000 hertz. Brrr, 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 and you're looking, oh, am I getting a nice ear canal resonance? Oh, yeah, okay, cool. Save it. Keep the tube in the ear, put the hearing aid on top of the tube in the ear, have the same input again. Brrr, brrr, brrr. Oh, look at my aided response. Cool. I'm getting lots of gain in the highs. Well, probably means the guy has very little hearing loss in the lows. Yep. Okay, good. And I'm getting lots of gain in the highs. Cool. What's the difference between aided and unaided? Oh, cool. That's my real ear insertion gain. Oh, am I pretty close to target? Cool. Go home. Okay. Real ear made it faster. That's what it did. Just made it quicker. Candy is dandy, but liquor is quicker. Okay. That's all it is. A change in method by which to verify, to prove, are you getting with the hearing aid what the fitting method said you should get? Do you see? Verification is a big important word in our field. Verification, verily, verily I say unto thee. What's the truth? Am I getting what my fitting method said I'd be getting? Or, bring it closer to home, am I getting what the manufacturer fitting software said I would get? Am I proving it? And too few clinicians, including audiologists with their AUDs and the HI hearing instrument practitioners with their 2-year degrees or with their IHS 1-year certification, too few clinicians actually use real ear, which is quite frightening in a way. That's like me saying, or as a doctor saying, yeah, I think you might have cancer, without taking a biopsy and proving it. We're in a healthcare field. We can't just walk around going, oh, how does that sound? Well, how does that sound? Well, how does that sound? That's kind of stupid. It's kind of subjective. We should have an actual readout with a research-based fitting method that's been proven to have good results for aided speech discrimination. And then that's the way we march forward as a healthcare profession into the public arena, so that we can raise the bar of our profession and show that we've got our act together. Cool. All right. Now let's look at our typed pages once again here. Mirror the audiogram with full gain, not with linear hearing aids, you can't. Older hearing aids were linear. They gave the same gain for all inputs. You can't mirror the audiogram with full-on gain, especially not with a reduced dynamic range. The ceiling is similar to normal, but the floor ain't. If you give all the hearing loss back, e.g. with a 50 decibel linear hearing aid, output for soft sounds like 5 dB might be okay, because 5 plus 50 is 55, but output for speech inputs like 60 to 70, you add 50 to that and you will exceed the listener's loudness tolerance. Liebarger used lots of trial and error with people with sensory neural loss. With full gain for hearing loss, he found, now here, check this out, 50 dB loss, he would fit the person with a 50 dB gain linear hearing aid. And then he'd stand a Texas yard from away in front of the guy, and he would speak in a normal voice. Now tell me, I want you all to turn the volume control until my voice sounds comfortable in loudness. You hear? And the guy invariably would turn it down by about half. That's where he figured out the half gain rule. For example, somebody with the 60 dB sensory neural loss actually wants about 30 dB of gain. And then he would supply the person with a linear hearing aid that gave about 30 dB of gain, and then he'd add about 15 dB reserve gain so the guy could crank it up a little bit louder if he felt like it. So he would give that guy a hearing aid. If the guy had a 60 dB flat hearing loss, he would give the guy a linear hearing aid that had a maximum gain of about 45. 30 to accommodate half gain, and the extra 15 for reserve gain in case the grandkid came in and was speaking softly and the guy wanted to crank it up a bit. Cool? All right. Okay, last little sentence here. UCL is measured in dBHL, right? Hearing aids are measured in dBSPL. The average difference between HL and SPL for the speech frequencies is around 10 to 15 dB. And so if a guy gives you a UCL of about 100 dB, it's common to add about 10 to 15 to that 100 to come up with a maximum power output in terms of dBSPL. That's why, okay? You never just set the MPO according to the guy's UCL. It's too low. You want to set the MPO of a guy's hearing aid a little bit higher than his UCL. You measured his UCL under headphones in dBHL. Hearing aids are read in dBSPL. The great compromise reached with the half-gain rule. A plus B is C. Linear hearing aids were state-of-the-art. Most sensory neural loss results in a reduced dynamic range. Therefore, the half-gain rule. And the half-gain rule assumes that linear gain, and that linear gain gives the same gain at all inputs. So all half-gain methods have one target, not three like today. Today, hearing aids are compression. So today, hearing aids give more gain for soft inputs, less gain for average inputs, less gain yet for loud inputs due to compression. So today's fitting methods usually can show at least 3 different targets. One for soft inputs, one for average inputs, one for loud inputs. But before compression emerged some 20 years ago, okay, hearing aids were linear. And the fitting methods were based on linear hearing aids. And they have one target for any person, okay? Your hearing loss being sloped this way, you'd have a target. My hearing loss sloped this way would have a different target, okay? But for any particular hearing loss, ein, uno, ichi target, okay? One. Because linear hearing aids give the same gain for all inputs. You'd want the guy to crank up the volume control for softer ones, turn down the VC for louder inputs, and have the VC somewhere between 1/2 and 2/3 for the average inputs, like speech. Okay? History. It's very important to know history. If we don't appreciate where we come from, by gum, we'll be condemned to repeat our experience. We need to know where we came from in order to understand where we're going today. And where we're going in this course is real ear today. And we no longer even use this kind of real ear anymore. We don't even use that crap. We've jettisoned it. About 10 years ago, that was thrown out the back window, okay? Today, we use speech mapping, which is, as they'd say down in the deep south, mo better. I mean, you look at this picture here. What kind of counseling can I do with this kind of real ear? Check this out. Well, you see, I've hit your target. I've provided the gain with the hearing aid so that it closely matches your target. Yeah, but what can my kid hear aided versus unaided with speech? What difference will it make? Can't see that here. There's not, speech isn't on this thing. The audiogram isn't on this thing. Nothing's on. In a way, this is even worse than this as far as counseling goes. I mean, yesterday's real ear was quicker, but it sucked when it comes to counseling. It wasn't very good. Okay? Back to our typed notes here. Half-gain fitting method forms the basis still of today's fitting methods. Today's fitting methods assume compression, which gives different gain for different inputs. Today's fitting methods for compression hearing aids may give more than half gain for soft inputs, half gain for moderate inputs like speech, and less than half gain for loud inputs. Today's compression-based methods thus offer more than one target, depending on the input level. This is the main way of telling new from early hearing aid fitting methods. And still today, no one fitting method has been proven to be the best. I just find it hilarious. It's just, that's our field. And it's not because we're not nice people. And it's not because we're stupid. It's because the damage to the end organ of hearing is so vastly different from the kind of damage to the end organ of seeing. That's why optometry shops are usually happy places with waterfalls and plants and style, and everybody's walking in and the whole mood is happy because how the heck you get vision loss at any decade of life? Glasses are just normal. Okay? It's just such a different kettle of fish. And again, knowing who we're not gives a lot better idea of knowing who we are. Look at the bottom of page 1. Gain for conductive versus gain for sensory neural hearing loss. Conductive hearing loss has greater impedance to sound due to the fact that it's a plugged ear. When you're riding on your lawnmower or pushing the darn thing, and you've got that sucker going loud, wah, you're plugging your ears to protect from noise-induced hearing loss, right? But you are giving yourself a conductive hearing loss on purpose. Always think of a conductive hearing loss as a plug in the ear. That's the best way I can possibly come with to an analogy of conductive hearing loss. Now your thresholds are increased, and also your loudness tolerance is increased. That's why you're wearing the earplug. You're to raise your UCL on purpose, deliberately. Of course, if your wife or husband comes out of the house and says something to you, you're not going to hear, okay, because you've increased your thresholds as well. Anyway, conductive loss has greater impedance due to impaired middle ear. Therefore, you have to provide more gain for the same degree of sensory neural loss. In other words, you have a 50 dB sensory neural loss or a 50 dB conductive hearing loss. The sensory neural loss you're going to amplify by something close to half gain, especially with speech inputs. Conductive loss you'll be amplifying by a little bit more, by about 1/4 of the degree of the air bone gap. You're going to increase so that's why some manufacturer software asks you, is it conductive or is it sensory neural? Because if it's conductive, you're going to add it's going to edge a little bit on toward a bit more gain. But enough on that. Let's carry on down here and talk about some of the history of this and that, and then we'll end today. And then next week, staying in Unit 3, we'll start covering the newer fitting methods. But let's just take a quick review here of some older fitting methods. Carhart, way back when, had something called the comparison fitting method. He didn't look so much at the thresholds. He was big and hyped on speech discrimination. He would choose from a drawer 3 different hearing aids, and he'd put them on the person. And he'd tweak the frequency response to kind of, in his head, match the degree of the loss, whatever. And then he would test speech discrimination. Which one gave the best speech discrim? And also which one the person liked the best. There was no prescription target per se. Okay? The selection procedure largely was based on the individual skill of him. It was hard to transmit his exact hows and whys from clinic to clinic. It's kind of tough to do. That's why prescriptive fitting methods with targets emerged, because they were numerically based on the actual numerical values of the thresholds. Half gain is the simplest. Divide the thresholds in half. All of them based on the half gain method in their own particular way. Each had their own unique formula by which they calculated targets from the audiometric thresholds. This enabled clinicians to communicate consistently across clinic to clinic. The target, in quotes, prescribes the amount of gain for any particular hearing loss with the hearing aid set at user volume. Very important. That's why I put that in italics. And again, a lot of today's hearing aids don't even have volume controls. But the volume control, if you have one or had one, was set at around 1/2 to 2/3, giving a little bit of reserve gain. And your idea was to see how close your insertion gain or your functional gain gets to the target. Now, always remember, this is called insertion gain with the early real ear, and this was called functional gain. Functional gain, okay? Functional gain is behavioral. The guy's raising his hand every time he hears a tone, whether it's under headphones or whether it's in the sound field wearing the hearing aid. Functional gain. Insertion gain is real ear. So this is functional gain, this is insertion gain. Back to the notes. Functional gain was the old way, behaviorally measured, the difference between sound field thresholds with and without a hearing aid, or the difference between unaided thresholds with a headphone and aided thresholds in a sound field. Insertion gain emerged with real ear. Sometimes real ear is called probe tube measures. And the difference between aided and unaided SPL at the eardrum would be, for any particular formula or fitting method, would be numerically the same as in functional gain. Okay, that's not that the fitting method didn't change, just the method in which you verified it did. All fitting methods began to look at insertion gain as being aided, real ear aided response minus real ear unaided response equals real ear insertion gain. That R should be a little G at the end. Newer, today's real ear measurement gives up gain. It says, who cares about gain? Output is the king of the castle. Always remember the formula. Input plus gain is output. Always remember that, okay, with hearing aids and with fitting methods and with real ear. Input plus the gain or the muscle of the hearing aid equals the sum total output that's smashing against your eardrum. Now, think about the analogy of going to the store to buy bread. The bread is the output. Okay, did you get the bread that you wanted? Gain is just, did you ride your bike to the store? Did you take a bus to the store? Did you drive to the store? Did you walk to the store? Who gives a crap how you got to the store? Did you get the bread? Okay, so today we put the emphasis on a different syllable, so to speak. We focus today on output, not gain. Anyway, we'll get to that. So the whole purpose of this is just to give you history, context, so that we know where we are today and why, what happened. So real ear today really only cares about real ear aided response. What's my aided response? We don't really care about unaided response anymore. That's kind of, yeah, whatever. We measure the guy's hearing loss under headphones. The computer automatically changes those thresholds into thresholds in dB SPL, automatically. And then those thresholds, now you map aided speech on it. And you see if aided speech is visually situated properly, above the guy's thresholds and below the guy's UCLs. Really different. I won't go there so much right now. Let's just quickly review 4 children of the half gain method. 4 kids. And these are all linear-based fitting methods. They're all kids. Okay? Mother was the half gain method. She had 4 kids. The oldest one was Berger. Okay? Each of these kids supplies different targets for the same hearing loss, but they're all based, they're variations of the half gain rule. Berger emerged in the 70s. Asks for lots of gain at 1,000 and 2,000 hertz. 250 hertz, multiply the threshold by 0.45. 500 hertz, multiply the threshold by a half. 1,000 hertz, multiply the threshold by a little bit more than half gain. 2,000 hertz, a little bit more than half gain. 3,000 hertz, still more than half gain. And at 4,000 hertz, half gain again. These numbers were based on the requirements for optimal speech intelligibility. And he also gave a reserve gain of about 10 dB that the guy could crank it up. Next came POGO, prescription of gain and output. It likes a lot of high frequency gain, just like Berger did, but it gives a little bit less mid and low frequency gain. Less than half gain for lows to prevent the upward spread of masking. Remember what that is? Lows mask highs better than highs mask lows. The soft rumble of a truck covers up the peeping of a canary better than the peeping of a canary covers up the rumbling of a truck. And we all recall from anatomy and acoustics why that is the case. It's because the traveling wave is shaped like a kite. It has an uneven shape. And its tail, the shallow tail, slopes toward the base of the cochlea, toward the highs, and the steep wave front faces north, faces the apex, faces the lows. So a loud, low frequency tone, I'm going to stop sharing here and I'm going to just show you my ugly mug again, shaped like a kite. Okay, kind of a bad way of showing you here, but why don't I just draw a picture here just to bug you. We've got the time here, I'm just playing. Okay, shaped like a kite. And here would be, so here you go. Can you see that puppy? Shaped like a kite. Okay, the low frequencies would be here, the high frequencies would be here. So if I make a loud, low frequency tone to activate the cochlea, okay, that's going to easily mask. So if I make a loud, low frequency tone like this guy right here, its traveling wave is going to mask the peeping high frequency canary. But I can make that peeping high frequency canary, I'll draw another little kite here, and I can make that peeping high frequency canary as loud as I want to. But it's not going to come out here and mask the low frequency tone. Upward spread of masking. It's called audiological checkmate. Can't do anything about it. So fitting methods try to address this, and especially POGO. And POGO gave, now I'm going to share screen again so we can finally move on here. POGO gave less than half gain for the low frequencies. For half gain at all frequencies with 10 dB less than half gain at 250, 5 dB less than half gain at 500. It also gave a reserve gain of about 10 dB. Then came Libby. Interesting. Libby said, you guys are all giving too much. I think mild to moderate sensory neural loss, they like about a third gain. They like about a third. Half gain's too much. However, if you've got a more severe hearing loss, they want more than half gain. They like 2/3 gain. Cool. Let me tell you something about what's neat about Libby. The Libby fitting method was the first method to address the word sensory neural. Sensory is outer hair cell pathology. Neural is inner hair cell pathology. And outer hair cells, what do? They help the inner hair cells pick up soft sounds. Soft, what kind of soft? Below 50. So if you've got outer hair cell pathology, you have a mild to moderate sensory neural hearing loss, common as Mrs. McGillicuddy and Mr. Jones. Outer hair cell pathology occurs before inner, usually. Okay? You know why two people may have different speech discrimination? The guy with good speech discrim probably has just outer hair cell pathology. The guy with crummier speech discrimination, his hearing loss might be caused by a mix of outer and inner hair cell pathology. So he's going to have way worse speech discrimination. Two people with 50 dB sensory neural loss. One is due to outer hair cell pathology. The other one's due to a mixture of both. The one due to a mixture is going to have the worst speech discrim because that guy's got sensory and neural. Remember, outers don't send info to the brain. Outers just take info from the brain. Inners send info to the brain. So with inner hair cell pathology, you've got a garbled up speech message being sent up to the brain. So their speech discrimination sucks. Anyway, Libby said outer hair cell pathology. They like third gain, 1/3. Neural, more severe hearing loss, 80 dB sensory neural loss. They tend to want power. They want 2/3 gain. I find that kind of interesting. I really, I don't know, I just find that kind of cool. He's the first one that ever really kind of addressed that. Okay, then you've got good old now. Now comes from the land down under, Australia. Comes from Sydney, Australia. Harvey Dillon. You've got a textbook by Harvey Dillon, okay? I've met Harvey Dillon before. Anyway, Australia is kind of a cool place. Now, from the Acoustics Labs of Australia in the 80s, the R stands for revised. It's by far the most common half-gain fitting method. It's still used today, but we use it now for compression. It's been developed. It's now NAL-NL1 and NAL-NL2. Those are compression-based versions of now. But today we're just looking at the earlier version, all linear-based. It's the fourth of the 4 kids of the half-gain method. Okay, it's the 4th one. All right, tries to make all adjacent speech frequencies equally loud. What the Sam Hill does that mean? Let's look at this a little bit. Let's look at an audiogram here. Check this out. Okay, here's your speech on an audiogram. We normally hear these sounds louder than these sounds, right? I mean, let's look at this carefully here. Normally, z, v, j, m, d, b, e, I, o, u, all those sounds are louder and lower than k, s. All right, that's how normal hearing people hear these sounds of speech. Now said, who cares? We don't care. We want to amplify so that the aided person hears all speech frequencies equally loud. Sound unnatural? They don't care. Now does not try to preserve the loudness relationships among the speech frequencies. That was their hallmark. Okay, it was like they just, instead it tries to make all speech frequencies contribute equally to the overall loudness of speech. Really huge. Oh, by the way, these slides are just talking about the burger thing. Okay, the burger and the pogo and the blah, 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 blah. Oh, this thing here too just means there's 100 dots here. Okay, in unaided speech. Each dot represents 1% of the audible cues required for you to understand what the word was. And most of the dots are clustered around 2000 hertz. That's why Berger loved 2000 hertz so much. See that? Anyway, just Pogo worried about the upward spread of masking. Libby giving 1/3 gain for mild to moderate and 2/3 gain for neural. Okay, and here's Now. Okay, so Now doesn't try to preserve those loudness relationships. Subsequently, they revised it. In 1986, they revised it. So when you look at this slide, pretend that there's no hearing loss, 0. Okay, look at the 0 and follow my cursor. The original now was like the white. It really decreased the gain for the low frequencies. The now that was revised didn't decrease the gain quite as much for the low frequencies. And remember, this decrease was made in order to decrease the gain for these low frequencies here, to make all speech frequencies sound equally loud. So how did they accomplish this? By reducing the gain, but the original now overcompensated. Subsequent research showed don't cut them quite as much. You did a little bit too much there. So the now R provides a little bit more low frequency gain than the original now did. But for the now R, which was the king of the whole planet for years, it was the most popular of the 4 kids, they did 3 things to come up with their targets. They took the Parent Teachers Association, pure tone average of 5, 1, and 2, and they divided it by 20, or they multiplied it by 0.05. Same thing. Then they took each threshold and divided it by 3, or multiplied it by 0.31. And thirdly, they added a different value at each frequency in order to make the speech equally loud. They did this stuff. So what did they do? Here you go. The lows, they cut, look at 250. They cut that, they cut this, they cut that. At 1,000 hertz, no problem, they leave it alone. And the very highs, they tended to cut just a few dB because of the shape of that weird speech banana thing that I'm showing you here, okay? Anyway, don't worry about it. And they came up with their targets. I'm going to finish today in about 2 minutes, okay, to show you, just to compare those 4 methods we talked about for a hearing loss looking like this. Berger, Libby, Now, Pogo, look at the differences. All of them based on the half gain rule, still the differences. For another loss, more steeply sloping, again, the 4 fitting methods with their targets, note the difference, okay? Again, with another hearing loss, note the differences. Half gain is in blue, Libby's third gain is down here in pink, but basically Berger, Pogo, and Now, look at the differences. And with that, I will stop sharing the screen. Look at my ugly mug one last time. We've spent our hour. We're a little bit more, which is just cool. We've covered a lot of ground. Now we know some history. Next week, stay with the very same unit. We're just going to cover DSL, desired sensation level, and now 1 and now 2, and we're going to compare the different targets among those 3 fitting methods. Cool? All right. Adios, amigos. Here, live long and prosper. See you later. Bye. All right, stop recording, Venema, and shut your